Welcome to the Asking Why podcast. I'm your host, Clint Davis. I'm a marriage and family therapist and licensed professional counselor trained in trauma and addiction. The Asking Why podcast is for anyone on a journey of healing and restoration. If you are searching for answers to life's questions and want to learn more about root causes from a psychological and theological mix, this show is for you. In this podcast, myself and a co-host from Clint Davis Counseling and Integrative Wellness will interview guests on a wide range of topics in order to get down to the heart of the problems facing our world and understand why things happen and how to change the world and ourselves for the better. Want to learn more tips and tricks to living a healthy lifestyle? Visit us at Clint Davis Counseling and Integrative Wellness on Facebook and Instagram. If you want to meet our staff or book a speaker, go to clintdaviscounseling.com. Thanks for listening and be sure to subscribe today. All right. Welcome, listeners, to episode 35 of the Asking Why podcast with Clint Davis. We have today Lisa Thompson, who is one of the vice presidents on the executive team of the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. NACOSE is the short that we'll be using. She's also the director of the Research Institute there. So welcome, Lisa. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Clint. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, absolutely. We were talking a little bit before, so tell me a little bit about tell us what NACOSE is, and then we'll get into your story.
Yeah, sure. We're a nonprofit organization. We're based in D.C., and we are really focused on exposing the connections between all forms of abuse and sexual exploitation. And we work on a really wide swath of sexual abuse and exploitation issues. So everything from child sexual abuse, child-on-child harmful sexual behavior, compulsive sexual behaviors, demand for sexual exploitation, illicit massage businesses, image-based sexual abuse, institutional sexual abuse, men's violence against women, public health harms of pornography, sex trafficking, sexual assault. I mean, there's more, there's just so many things. So we're a bit insane. People might think it's crazy. Sometimes I think we are, because generally as organizations, if you read management books, they tell you to try to have a more narrow focus. But we have kind of just adopted a different philosophy and feel like there were issues that were not getting brought to the fore, connections that were not being made because people weren't looking at these issues, with this as a really broad, holistic perspective. So that's what we're trying. I think that's really our niche in this whole space. Yeah. Is looking at these issues broadly and trying to help point out intersections between them.
Yeah, I mean, y'all have a great systemic model where you're kind of looking at the family as a whole, right? So I'm a systems therapy person. So if I have one person in my office, I always treat it as if there's multiple people here, whether they're here or not. And so I think that's kind of, let's say you're looking at the massage issue, right? Well, that porn ties into that, that trafficking ties into that, that child abuse ties into that, all of those things, they all overlap. And without one, you don't have the others.
Yeah, so that's you've said it so well. It is looking at these things as systems, and recognizing that one is often a stepping stone to another, or that the lines of demarcation are actually really fuzzy sometimes, or not these bright dividing lines between different forms of abuse that we maybe traditionally have thought of. So actually, a colleague and I were just talking about that today on issues relating to pornography and prostitution. And that we actually take the position that pornography is a form of prostitution. But I think the way most people see it, they've been very distinct things. But today with camming and these online forms of pornography that people are
like OnlyFans.
Yeah, like OnlyFans, where there's interaction, there's, direction from the buyer. I think people maybe can more clearly see how, calling it pornography instead of prostitution, maybe it doesn't make as much sense. It's an online form of prostitution.
No, definitely. I mean, because of technology and the changes in technology at such a rapid rate, that these kind of philosophies and ideas that we've had for years that are, would you say, I know on our end, so for listeners, I'm also the director of recovery for purchase, not for sale, which we work with women and children and men out of human trafficking. And then Lisa, we also just started this last year doing John schools. So I wrote a curriculum with Cassie Hammett, one of the founders of our ministry. And so we partner with the DA. And so guys who are first time or second time offenders, they can come to our program and they learn about trafficking. They learn about what it's like from the victim, from the prostitute, from the trafficked perspective, what they're actually buying, that these girls start in the system at as young as 12, that they typically have sexual abuse before 3, these stats that I know and then I go into what is sexual addiction, what is sexual trauma, why are you here? I always say, in the beginning of the talk, like, I think that if you had the information we're about to give you, you wouldn't have done what you did. That we don't see you as a monster, but we see you as somebody who is in need of help as well. And then we do, out of that demand, we do what's called a disruption ministry. So we partner with the FBI, and we have like 4 or 5 computers. On Thursday nights we meet up. They put an ad out on Backpage. I'm sure you've heard about this. And then we get text and calls in from guys trying to buy prostitutes, and we try to interrupt that process, give them resources, give them a first chance, things like that. So when you say demand, like, I totally am all about that, because
Yeah, should probably also clarify that I mean sex buyers. I know not everybody understands what we mean by the term demand.
Yeah.
Like, what's demand got to do with sexual exploitation? But we're just talking about the consumer level demand that, and in this case, male sex buyers who drive a lot, so many forms of sexual exploitation, like the pornography industry, like sex trafficking, prostitution, illicit massage, businesses, etc.
Can you break that down for people? Just talk about demand a little bit.
Yeah. So basically, we're talking about overwhelmingly men who are consumers of, and traditionally, I think a lot of the folks who've been working in this space have been talking about demand for prostitution, which generates the demand for sex trafficking. So you have men who want to go and, pay for sex, and they, go to wherever in the past, your red light district in the, some seedy part of town. And those are the people who drive the prostitution marketplace. No matter where it is in the world, the people who drive it are the people who are making the choice to purchase other people for sex. That's the choice that drives the entire enterprise. So our philosophy
is the supply, right? Yeah.
Which means, so never sufficient supply. So therefore you have individuals who act as the quotes, so-called distributors. That's a fancy way of talking about pimps and sex traffickers.
Yeah.
Pimps are functional equivalents of sex traffickers. They recruit, they harbor, they provision and obtain people using force, fraud, and coercion for purposes of sexual exploitation. So pimps are sex traffickers, and they are just, coming in to fill the gap that may exist in supply. Because there's never a sufficient supply, unfortunately, because demand seems like an ever-present problem and growing problem. So our approach is really, we're having a big, Nicosia is really concerned about this issue and wanting to have a major focus on demand, because we really feel like this is the prevention strategy for so much of the sexual harm that is going on around the world. If we can change male sex buying behavior, we can deter it, prevent it, then, untold amounts of trauma are not going to happen.
Yeah.
An untold amount of trafficking won't happen if we can engage men, help them see why it's harmful, help them to see why this isn't even authentic connection, and they deserve better. I mean, of course the women deserve better, but they deserve real relationships too.
Absolutely.
And it's not just these fake casual throwaway things that society has sold everybody. So if your listeners might be interested in a project that we're working on at the Research Institute at Nicosia. We have a website that was actually created by another group, but they decided they wanted to didn't want to maintain it anymore. So we have taken on management of a website called Demand Forum. And Demand Forum is all about methods to deter demand for paid sex. Mm-hmm. So many of them are law enforcement centric, but there's also some community-based approaches where people might, do outreach in their community or organize at a community level that's not, tied in with law enforcement. But it outlines a typology of methods that have been used across the country to combat demand for paid sex, and gives information about where they've been implemented in communities all across the country. So we're like well over, I think more than 2,200 communities that we've documented where they have taken some form of action to deter demand. So we are presently working on a federal grant to expand the website, update the website, because it had gotten a little out of date. So we're working on updating it, adding information about some of the new tactics that are being used to deter demand. For instance, a lot of the new technology-based approaches, kind of like what you were talking about just now, where whether the groups might be using fake ads online, or now though there's groups that are actually moving into using bots.
Yep.
Are these forms of artificial intelligence that can communicate with potential buyers, have conversations with them, flag the really serious-looking ones to law enforcement, and potentially convince men that they should think again before they try to buy a person.
Yeah, we've seen great results. I mean, it's been amazing to see that, like you said, these guys are, although at the time they're the perpetrator, right? As you hear their stories, and as I worked with these men, I see that they're just as much a victim of the culture and of the neglect and the abuse and the trauma as the women. It just plays out differently because of, obviously strength and power and systemic problems. But I mean, all the guys that I see and have treated and have worked with, they started viewing porn before 8. They had sexual abuse in their background. They have unhealthy, relationships with their mothers. There's kind of this pattern of what creates a person who would, who would buy sex. And so I think it's in order to beat demand, in some ways we have to educate people on learning how to be a little empathetic towards the person who's also the buyer, instead of seeing them as a monster. Although they need consequences and there needs to be accountability, in order to heal that person so they don't do it again, we actually have to understand them.
I'm so glad you used the word accountability. I think that's such a powerful word, and it's so true that we need to hold the people, the men who are buying others for sex. We need to hold them accountable, and that's been largely lacking in all across the country. I mean, even though we're documenting places where they are implementing some demand, or have at one point in time implemented some kind of demand deterrence, typically sometimes it's not sustained, or other times it might be, it's just, not sustained, not generally as concerned about, like there are a lot more attention put on, arresting the victims. Yep. As opposed to dealing with the ones who are driving the exploitation. So creating accountability for buyers is definitely front and center in our agenda at Nicosi, how we can, increase penalties to hold buyers more accountable. Of course, we want to see them get help. But I totally agree with you that there's a lot of things, like there's a way in which the society kind of works as a super groomer, particularly the exposure to pornography.
That's such a great word. Yep.
Basically making the on-ramp so that they become exploiters in a way. But at the end of the day, they are the ones that have the real choice in the situation, and are, generally are operating from a position of privilege,
right,
compared to those who they're exploiting, who typically come from, like you were talking about, situations of childhood sexual abuse in their past, or economic vulnerability. There's really skewed racial demographics that go on when you start looking under the, uncovering the layers of this issue. You'll find that predominantly victims are from minority groups, Black and brown groups. So so holding them accountable, I have empathy for them, and maybe not empathy is the right word, sympathy is the right word.
Yeah.
But I agree totally that it's not constructive to frame them as monsters. Typically, these are people who we're working side by side with, who we might know from our workplaces, from our places of worship, even tragically sometimes our own families.
Yeah.
So these are people who are known and loved by others. And for whatever reasons, there's lots of different reasons guys get into this, but they need help, but they need to be held accountable for the harm that they cause. So.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. The charges and, the fluctuation in fees and how much it is. I mean, sometimes it's a very, a gentle slap on the wrist, and sometimes it's, that's the problem, right? Is it's the inconsistency of that accountability, what they're required to do afterwards. And, and here in Shreveport, I mean, that's why I love that they have the John School option. They have to come and show up, face us, face the other men in the group. And you're right. It's like, it's crazy. We show up at 7:30 in the morning and it's like Lexus, beat up pickup truck, Mercedes. And then it's like, such a cross denomination, that too, ethnic group, socioeconomic status. It just, I always say, there's not many middle upper class people who are going to be smoking crack, but sexual exploitation and sexual, things, they cross all denominations and culture and socioeconomic status. And so it's an interesting thing to be working with demand for sure.
Yeah. So your comments made me think about there is some evidence to show that men with higher incomes have are more likely to be buyers than lower income. I mean, I think there's still low income buyers, don't get me wrong, but there was a slight increased likelihood that the guys would be making over 100,000.
Yeah, and that makes sense within the sexual addiction. So I'm a certified sex addiction therapist, and one of the things that we see is that who ends up being sex addicts the most are doctors, lawyers, men of upper, because it fits with their performance and their insecurity and their trauma. Low warmth in the household, but high demand for performance. They end up, getting addicted to pornography early on and exposed to that. Like you said, I love that idea of society being the super groomer, because it's so true. And then by the time they've become a teenager, they have this addiction, this trauma that's fueling now power and authority and privilege that just opens the door for exploitation.
Definitely. Now, I know we've been talking a lot about demand and
no, it's good.
Our conversation's kind of taken a curve from where we were planning. So I don't know if you want to come back or you just want to keep going. Or...
No, it's good. I just wanted to I plan stuff and the podcast never goes exactly where I want it to, I like to leave room for the Holy Spirit, in my opinion. I think we covered demand pretty good, and people can go look up more of that and just see. I think what I'd like to leave people with is just demand is for all of us to take if you're a man, if you're a woman, and you're a part of that, right? We're not saying, men are worse than women. We're saying that based on our system and based on the thing, it happens to be that men are the ones that buy the most. They're also victims. They also have trauma. They also need treatment, but they also need accountability. And we need to see buying and exploiting people as a major problem that needs major consequences, not a trivial thing.
Yeah. So you put it so beautifully. Yeah. It's not a trivial thing to buy another person.
No.
And use them, like you just use them like a masturbatory tool. Like it's so terrible. And another thing that you were just saying, I think makes so sense. And we're not saying men or women, men are worse than women or anything, but just that in this particular issue, it historically has been so predominantly driven by male behavior. Now, but this gives me an opportunity to make a segue, Clint, and talk about something that I think could be changing. Particularly as the next few years go by, we're seeing more and more young women as consumers of pornography. And given the way that pornography is consumed these days, a lot more of it's becoming interactive. It's on these platforms where you pay to subscribe to somebody. You can tip them, you can direct them to do things. And we know that more and more girls are watching on a regular basis. So, and the thing is that there's a connection between consuming pornography and sex buying. Mm-hmm. So for some young women, this could potentially start leading to, I think, a rise in maybe we're going to start seeing more women as buyers. But for now, I think it's safe to say that the majority of those who consume others, buy other people for sex, are males. But I am concerned about the potential for kind of something that really hasn't existed much before, which is, an actual, perhaps measurable portion of women becoming sex buyers.
Yeah. So let me just talk about why for just a second, since that is kind of our focus. So I think part of the problem is just a biological factor of men having testosterone and being more visual, and women not having that same biology. Meaning, if your spouse, like if you're married to a man and you're married to a woman, right, opposite genders, and they send you a nude picture of themselves and they're a male, most women would say, I don't really care about that or want a picture of my husband's penis. But if a woman sent their husband a picture of them nude, right, there's going to be a visual biological stimulation. And so I say all that to say pornography is so much more. It's not that men are like more gross or more sexually perverse. It's that the biology that they have makes them more susceptible to things based on this kind of cultural grooming that you're talking about. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I that's an interesting thing you raised. I haven't really dug into that a whole lot. I've heard that many times that, men are very visually, oriented, and that visual stimulation really triggers a response right away. But I think, I know, like, for instance, at our conference, we hold a conference annually, just finished last week, the Coalition to End Sexual Exploitation Summit. There are women who are struggling with pornography addiction themselves. So I guess part of what I'm saying is that I think traditionally, though, what you're saying has been the case, but because our whole society is shifting to become a visually oriented society.
Yes.
So we're very image driven, all the social media sites, the Instagram, the Pinterest, the Facebook, right? It's pictures, 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 pictures. So, and then of course the pornography is very, it's pictures and film, videos. So that, and you're consuming this it's overstimulating the brain. We're consuming it via screens. We know that visual stimulus is a very powerful stimulus to the brain. So it is sucking in women.
Absolutely.
Which didn't, really was basically not thought of 30, 40 years ago.
I'd say like 12 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, it's just crazy. So many, young women are consumers of pornography now. And
I think it's 36% or something increase. Yeah.
I just heard a stat last week, which you could have knocked me over with a feather. I was just gobsmacked. And this was from a neuroscientist. So, I mean, this is not some half-baked stat.
Yeah.
They had published a study looking at prevalence rates of pornography use among young people, and the monthly checking in with pornography site among adolescents was 1 percentage point higher for girls than boys.
Yep.
I was like, what?
Yeah.
It's
insane. Yeah. And so, just to wrap that conversation up. So when I'm saying the biological thing, it's like, it's the susceptibility to that. But the problem that we're having, and that, let's say 11 years ago, that was true. And so we saw men who bought prostitution, who watched pornography, who got magazines. And for women, it's like, that's not really a thing for me. But yes, once the phone came into existence and once technology came into existence and once access was the same, you had this huge increase in boys in the beginning, in men. But then because women and girls have been having smartphones and seeing Instagram and seeing pornography, number one, I think watching it so they can keep up with what their boyfriends and their husbands want. And then once they watch it and get interested in it and exposed to it on a multiple time level, then all of us are cavemen and women. So we can't beat it. That dopamine that we get from pornography and that addiction that can quickly come in. And that's set up on top of a bunch of kids who already come from divorce, who already have trauma, who already have attachment issues, who are already kind of primed to, when they get this immediate connection, fake connection of pornography, for it to be, an addiction right off the bat. So I think you're right. I think that's why we've seen the huge uptick in women and young girls, is because little boys are getting their sex education from pornography. And so I hear it all the time in my office, where a girl will come in crying because her boyfriend broke up with her because he wouldn't let her do X, Y, and Z. And the boy doesn't know any better because he just thinks that's how sex goes. he's wanting to do this either very violent or very graphic or very abusive, what we would say is healthy adults thing. But he's just seeing it as, well, that's what they do in porn. That's what you do with sex. That's how you have sex. And the girls are going, well, I guess I got to do that if I'm going to keep this relationship. And it's just a mess.
Yeah, it's a real mess. I think part of, what we're kind of shifting towards is the issue of escalation.
Mm-hmm.
So, people get exposed, particularly, kids, they're getting exposed. It's not a matter of if, it's when. So just for all your listeners, any viewers out there who think, oh, it's not my kid is good and they wouldn't do that. It's not about how good your kid is. We know your kid is good.
Amen.
The fact is that there's a society that's targeting your child, who's businesses who are all about getting access to your child and turning them into a pornography consumer. Their peers are going to be seeing it, their classmates, their buddies at sports. It's not if, it's when they will be exposed. And so the thing is to be working now, laying the groundwork now, so that when that happens, you can have the right conversations, that you can prepare your child to respond to when they see pornography and not be caught up in the shame cycle that will lead them into addiction. But they would actually have a built-in defense mechanism if you start working with your children when they're young.
Yeah.
So laying that groundwork.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I've been speaking all over the place about that. So I'm super excited to nerd out with you and have somebody else to be preaching the same thing. It's, our listeners are definitely going to be like, yes, this is what we've been talking about. We just did 2 podcasts about, I think 6 or 7 episodes ago. And if you haven't listened to it and you're listening to this one, go back. And I basically kind of take an hour to walk everybody through 0 to 6-year-old dialogue, 7 to 12-year-old, and then 13 to 18. And just, where are they at developmentally? What are they being exposed to? Why should you be using the word penis and vagina? Those kind of things to show them, like, you can't start the conversation about masturbation at 14.
Did you happen to bring up the book, Good Pictures, Bad Pictures?
I did. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. I'm actually with, I can't remember who I emailed with, but she's trying to get me in touch with the writer, and I'm going to try to have her on here.
Yeah. Kristen.
Yeah.
She's a good friend of ours at the Cozy, and her organization, Defend Young Minds, is just fantastic. And we highly recommend the book, Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. And
yeah. Bring it all over the place with me.
brain defense.
Yep.
Helping kids. So great. I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah, I love it. And what's the other one? Protect Young Eyes. It's a good app that kind of takes parents through how to talk about it. And so, yeah, I'm super excited that, I think that's the sad part. It's the prevention is so doable. We can do it as a culture. We can prevent these things for our kids with just a few steps. It's not like the conversation really overwhelms parents. I was on the Brainy Moms podcast last Thursday, and there are 2 neuropsychologists that run Learning RX nationally. And we were having this conversation, and they were just like, oh my gosh, we've never even thought about this stuff. And it's like, wow. I get it. If you do what we do, then it's just normal. And I'm sure, Lisa, you found this, like, your brain is not normal.
My brain is not. I would say it's not. I would agree with that. So
right. It's
I'm
like,
sure would too.
Right. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. My wife's like, what are you talking? Like, what do you do all day? But it's like you go to dinner and everything is, you go to babysitters or you go to sleepovers, and well, we don't do that, but you go to, your friends are doing these things, and your brain's like on a whole nother level about this stuff. So
yeah,
it's like, you don't want to know it, but you have to know it to be able to defeat it.
Yeah. So it is, there does seem to be some reticence among parents. There's just, we were having some discussion about this at our summit. It's hard, it's hard not to get frustrated sometimes, because it does seem like there's some willful just ignorance or ego that comes into play when we're talking about these issues and protecting children. Like, oh, again, like my kid wouldn't do that.
Oh.
But and then what generally happens is then it's too late, right? It does happen, and then they're like, oh yeah, okay, I made a mistake, but by that point, harm has come into the situation. So it is frustrating, and it's hard. but I know there's a lot of really well-meaning parents who are trying really hard and are completely inundated and overwhelmed by how to protect their kids. And, so there is the I mean, and I think if anybody, most people, parents are probably more cognizant of just the concern about somebody molesting their child, like in a more, direct, like physical presence, right there, like somebody in their community or something. But they're not necessarily thinking about all the online potential for harm.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I would challenge, like, what I see in my office is people are scared of it, but they're still not really preventing it very much because they don't want to talk about it and get the education. So it's like we're barely preventing. What's the stat now? Like 1 in 3 girls by 18 have been sexually abused, and 1 in 5 boys. That's what's reported.
Well, I have an update for you on that. So it's some recent. I was just checking. So I think the more current stat would be 1 in 5 girls and 1 in 13 boys, and I'd be happy to send that to you,
Yeah,
Clint,
please do.
Where that comes from. So I'm not.
No, that's good. I think the shift is in the same way, and maybe you can catch me. You can tell me if I'm wrong. I'm reading a book right now, and it was talking about the decline in sex in teenagers too, right? That kids aren't having as much sex, and people are like, great, and it's like, well, that's because they've moved it into this online, Snapchat, sexting, pornography realm. So I would say it's probably the same here. Maybe the stat on actual physical abuse is lowered, but we don't need to be excited. I mean, we need to be excited that people aren't getting physically abused. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes, and I totally agree.
Okay.
Like I was mulling this over when I was, kind of thinking about this talk we were going to have today, and I was just like, wow, on the one hand, it looks good, but I really think that we're not counting the sexual abuse of children like appropriately.
Yes, I agree.
You think about all the stuff that's going on, particularly in the online realms, where their abuse is happening and parents are oblivious, and we're not different kinds of abuse. So, for instance, just last week, I was connecting with a woman who was telling me about the rape of children's avatars in video games.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I was floored. I work in this issue, every day. I have worked in it for years. I mean, granted, I'm not deep in the gaming issues or anything like that, but I had not heard of this. And she's telling us that this is happening to, countless children, that predators operating in the gaming systems will lure them into certain rooms in these games and rape the child's avatar, and that the children are experiencing this as a rape. Mm-hmm. They're feeling like their identity is so wrapped up, I suppose, in the game, that they're taking this as an acute form of trauma. And she's talking to all these young girls online who are just completely
devastated,
traumatized over what's happening to this persona that they have online. So that's happening. Another really concerning thing is the self-generated images, like we were talking about, the sexting. So let's say they're even sexting among their peers. Well, the peer shares it. Another person uploads it to a pornography website. So now it's literally, consumable by anybody on these pornography sites. So, for instance, the Internet Watch Foundation is saying that there's been a huge uptick in what self-generated content that they're dealing with, that they're finding on the pornographic websites that they're contending with all the time. That now a huge spike in self-generated content.
Yeah.
So that's not going to come under this heading of child sexual abuse.
Right. It's not going to fit the stat.
Definition in this stat, right? But yet, so it's so alarming to me that we've actually bred a generation of children who will produce their own sexual abuse images. The pornographers don't even have to.
Yeah.
The children will do it for them.
I know, it's unbelievable.
Yeah. So, and the other thing that's unbelievable is how many people take a really just blasé attitude towards the sexting issue. I mean, I was at a national sexual assault conference where there was a woman giving a talk on sexting, and just acted like, well, anybody who thought it was a problem was practicing ageism. It's just all you old people who are just too unhip and cool to understand that kids are going to sex each other, and what's the big deal?
Yeah.
I mean, this is at a sexual assault conference.
Yep.
Like where you would expect people to understand the trauma involved with these children when their images get distributed, and they find themselves on a pornography site where everybody around the world gets to use them, and there's nothing they can do about it.
No, I know. Lisa, you're so right. It is so crazy to be at conferences and I'm on listservs and symposiums and you're there and you're just looking like, you got person has 4 heads because they're not getting the systemic complex, it's so weird where we're moving in culture where the whole movement of like ageism and millennialism and all these things are like, yeah, there's some of that's true, or there's systemic issues that are true, but you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater and just say, oh, well, these kids, because they now have, like you were saying with the game. Okay, so let's talk about the avatar thing for people who don't know what that is. So an avatar is like your projected image of yourself in a game. So that these kids, like their Instagram handle, their Instagram page, their Facebook page, which they don't have anymore because it's not cool. They have grown up in a social media world where they project to the world who they are through these means, right? So their identity is wrapped up in what people see on Instagram and what people see through their avatar for gaming. And so a lot of girls play games, a lot of boys play games, 8, 9, 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds. And everybody knows them in their social network through these avatars. And so they get their worth and their connection through this. Now, we're not saying any of that's good or appropriate or best for our culture, but that is the actual reality. And so for some strange adult to come on and to bring their character on and to rape this character or do something damaging to this character, for them, it's like it's damaging their identity, right?
Yeah, it's like their projected persona. You were saying it. You said it so well.
So for listeners, so for listeners out there thinking about their kids or thinking about kids or our culture in general, it's not enough to just say, oh, well, that's how they are now, so therefore we just have to adapt what's right or wrong. There's still a truth, right? There's still a right or wrong. There's still an abusive situation going on. Just because the culture's changed doesn't mean that truth has changed.
Yeah. Boy, you hit that nail on the head.
It's frustrating, but I'm with you. I had a mom in here a couple of weeks ago, and we were her daughter had been abused, and so we were talking through it. And she had a 14-year-old son. I said, "Well, what's going on with him? Is he struggling with?" She was like, "Oh, we watch his porn all the time, but that's what all boys do." And I said, "You're right. Statistically, all boys do watch porn, but the reality is that doesn't make it okay. That normal doesn't mean healthy." And I think, man, we've really moved in this culture of, well, everybody's doing it, and it's normal for kids to be on their phone, or normal for kids to sext, or normal for kids to, but we've forgotten that doesn't mean it's healthy.
Well, also, I imagine she's probably not very familiar with what pornography is like today.
Oh man, please talk about that. Yeah.
I mean,
it's not your 80s porn, right?
It's not your 80s pornography. And I don't mean to say that the pornography of the past was harmless. When I'm making this, I'm not, because there were violent, horrible types of pornography available in the 80s, in the 60s. It was there. But a lot of the more mainstream stuff was what today we would call vanilla, or very,
softcore.
It would be tame. Yeah, softcore by comparison to what we see today. So because of what happens when people consume pornography, they get desensitized. It's a natural process in the brain. When you get exposed to stimulus and you repeatedly expose yourself to that stimulus, your brain isn't going to react the same way. So you have to engage, try to find something that's more exciting, something that's shocking, something that's upsetting, something that is surprising, in order to get the pleasure that you're seeking. So this has given rise to all kinds of just inconceivable, previously, fetishized content, and really the rise of really rough sex and torture sex practices that are completely going mainstream. And just an example, I'd say one of the more common practices that we're seeing happening is choking.
Mm-hmm.
Choking is completely unheard of as a mainstream sexual practice within the last 40 years. Now, totally mainstream. Young women are dying because men are, choking them during sex, and then it's easy for them to pass it off as just saying, "Oh well, it was just consensual sex that went wrong."
Mm-hmm.
And so there's been cases of this in the UK and New Zealand, and I imagine there's more. I haven't really dug into the issue here in the US, but folks are interested. There's a woman who is a real expert in the phenomenon of choking and death, the femicide that results. So at any rate, it's a really concerning practice that's really going mainstream with our young people today. And that would be an example, like more than likely this woman's son has seen something. I wouldn't be surprised in the least. I wouldn't be surprised in the least if he's seen things normalizing incest. I wouldn't be surprised in the least if he had seen things normalizing sexual assault. We just reviewed a study that was out of the UK, which reported that 1 in 8 titles, just the titles of pornography on the two of the bigger, more well-known pornography sites in the UK included overt references to sexual violence and exploitation.
Mm-hmm.
1 in 8 on the landing page. So this is the content that they're wanting you to see, that they have total control over what's on their landing page. This is like advertising for the pornography website, primed real estate. So if you're a first-time user to a pornography site, you're a 9-year-old boy who's landing on one of these websites, 1 in 8 of the thumbnails was going to have a title that referenced some form of sexual violence or exploitation. So how can this not be normalizing their attitudes and potential behaviors with future partners?
Well, it 100% is. Lisa, you're spot on. I mean, it doesn't matter. Again, I think that's the science behind it. It doesn't matter how good of a person you are and how in real life you wouldn't want to do that. It becomes a thing that's unconscious, that is built into your neural network, and then when you're in the middle of sex, that comes out. And so that's what I'm seeing is a boy who's like, yeah, I watched it, but I would never want to do that. And then they end up having sex with a girl and it becoming violent or graphic in a way because that's the pathway that was built before they even interacted with another human. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so there's like this before they even have their first kiss. Like, what? And what's there that's teaching them anything about tenderness or, whatever
Intimacy.
happened to, like whatever happened to holding hands and, just the tender first kiss and, or necking, like those things are out the window.
Oh yeah.
Like going to full sex and rough sex at that and stuff that would be really appalling to your viewers, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, all of this is uncomfortable to listen to for people. I mean, I know it's not uncomfortable for me and you to talk about because we do it every day, but it's still like we have to disrupt this mentality that things are just okay, and that the porn that they're seeing, I mean, Instagram, Twitter, all of those things, Snapchat, all of them are full of toxicity and just a messaging to our kids that these things are okay, they're normal, in some ways they're healthy. And yeah, it's creating, well, we don't know what it's creating yet. I think that's my biggest fear and my biggest push for the prevention piece that I'm trying to do is, and that you guys are trying to do is, I said this the other day, I've said on the podcast before, but where we're sitting right now, like all the things that we're talking about was created by men who barely had access to porn. And the porn that they had access to was pretty vanilla compared to what we're just talking about. And these were all men who saw this stuff, experienced this stuff in their teen years and their puberty years, and then became men who exploited people and created pornography systems and trafficking systems and all these things. What are these kids going to create in the next 5 to 10 to 15 years?
I don't even want to contemplate the answer to that question.
I know.
It's going to be bad.
Yeah, and like I mean, we're going to keep fighting the fight, and there is hope, but hope for those listening, for the greater system, I'm not sure how much hope there is. I think we're going to see the consequences of it. All we can do is prevent it for as many people as possible.
Well, along those lines, it made me think of a couple things I wanted to raise. One, again, to point back to the woman whose son was watching pornography. Some of the stuff he's watching invariably is involving sex trafficking victims.
Yep.
And non-consensually distributed material that gets uploaded to these websites. So that's a really important point, I think, for everybody to understand, because there's this assumption that, these are just everybody's consenting and everybody just decided they wanted to do this. Well, the porn industry, number one, is built off the backbone of, the very foundation of it is built on vulnerable and exploited young women who barely just turned 18, who are very naive, easy to manipulate, lured in by promises of fame and money, often exploited by sometimes parents, by boyfriends, who, so-called consensually agree. But then, once they agree, years later, they can never do anything they want. They can't get it back. Like they don't want to give consent anymore. But that one decision that they made when they're 18 or 19 years old now haunts them the rest of their lives. Mm-hmm. So there's to be clear, there is plenty of force, fraud, and coercion within the pornography industry itself. There absolutely no doubt is sex trafficking of people within the pornography industry. And then we have all kinds of people who have, created intimate images that they shared with a partner, and then that gets non-consensually shared and uploaded on these websites. And then you've got all kinds of voyeuristic content that's being made where women have no idea that they're being filmed in locker rooms, in toilets, in public spaces. And this is a whole genre that exists within these pornography sites of the voyeuristic, so-called spy cam pornography. So that's the kind of stuff that a young boy is consuming today if he's on a pornography site.
And girls, as you were saying,
Yeah, and girls. Thank you for correcting me there, for sure. And
yeah, that's the crazy part is, like you said, the stat literally is that girls are viewing it more.
Yeah, I couldn't have, at least on this one study. Sure. It wasn't a representative study as far as I know. I need to go. I just learned about it last week, so I haven't read it yet. But I was flabbergasted that there was a number that showed higher usage of girls than boys. That was totally. And again, going back to I've been mentioning our conference quite a lot, which was the Coalition to End Sexual Exploitation Summit. If people are interested, we are selling. You can buy a pass to be able to access all the content from that. It's still on sale at a reduced price.
Where can they find that?
If you go to our website, which is endsexualexploitation.org, endsexualexploitation.org, and you can find the summit, which is the Coalition to End Sexual Exploitation Summit. It'll be right there on our website. You can get a pass and check out. So you didn't really miss it. You can go back.
It was on Zoom, right?
Yeah. There was an app called Hoova that we used to it, but the videos are recorded and they end up like on a Vimeo site behind a paywall.
Yeah.
So everybody can access, if you buy a pass, you can access all the content we had this year.
That's awesome.
But it talks about, all the stuff we've been talking about, Clint. We had really robust presentations on. I think people would really get a lot out of it. But back to these pornography websites, the one thing I would say to give people some encouragement is that we are in the process of suing some of these websites, trying to hold them accountable to create some degree of justice for the victims. So I'm hopeful, maybe if we talk again in a year or 2 years, Clint, that we might have some progress to report there. But I would say, from where we were a year ago to where we are now, I don't think anybody would have believed it was possible that we could have created the shift that we are currently experiencing in the pornography fight, in that we have really taken the fight to Pornhub. And folks might be familiar with the woman by the name of Lila Micklethwait, who has led a charge called Trafficking Hub, in which she has been calling out against the abuses and the extreme content and just exploitation of countless women and children and boys on Pornhub, which is owned by the company MindGeek, which is based out of Canada. So we were able to galvanize based on what Lila had started with a petition that got like over 2 million signatures. There was then a big New York Times piece that was published last December by Nicholas Kristof that was looking at the exploitation of children on these sites like Pornhub. So then the Canadian Parliament, its ethics committee, did a special investigation into Pornhub, into MindGeek. It was the first time ever this company, which has been doing this stuff for over a decade. Okay, this, like, we've been beating our head on a wall. This has been going on for over a decade. Everybody's pretending it's not happening, like literal crime happening on a website. But anyway, the Canadian Parliament has woken up to the issue. They did an investigation. They issued a really lengthy report. We were able to get the CEO of MindGeek and some of his associates. They actually were called to testify before this committee. So they basically got them out of their hole in the ground somewhere. Like, seriously, these guys just kind of stay out of the light, you know.
Yeah, they couldn't even find I know his name, but I won't say it. But I don't want to give him credit. But yeah, they couldn't even find that dude for a while, and everybody was kind of trying to figure out who is this guy, who owns it, who owns mine, like what's it a subsidiary of? And so yeah, I read all that stuff you guys wrote up, and the New York Times thing too. I love that. So hats off to you guys for, really fighting this fight, because it's going to save a population of our culture's life.
Yeah, and I want to give a shout out to all the firms that we're co-counsel with. I don't want to give the impression that Nicosi's going it alone.
Right, yeah, none of us are.
Yeah, our law center is partnering with various other law firms in some of these lawsuits that around the country. So just wanted to give them a shout out. And anyway, we're really excited, hopeful that that's really going to make a difference. And we also have a big, really important lawsuit against Twitter, again, for a situation where a boy's images were first, there was sexting, and then they were uploaded on Twitter, and Twitter wouldn't take them down, and it had hundreds of thousands of views, and they just refused to take them down for quite a period of time. So we're like, hey, enough. And so one of our legal counsels will be arguing that in court just in a couple of weeks.
Right. So
we're so excited. It's a really, really huge case. People can follow us on our website at endsexualexploitation.org to keep up with what's happening with the Law Center and all of our lawsuit efforts.
Yeah, definitely. I'll be following that too. Let's jump into, I don't know how much time you have. How much time you got left?
Well, we said we're going an hour. I can go a little bit longer if you need to go.
Okay.
I don't know if you will do these episodes.
Yeah, I just kind of leave open 2 hours, and then I didn't want to take up too much of your time because I know you're busy. If you'll give me just a few more minutes, talk about the Dirty Dozen. Can you? Oh,
sure. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that. Thanks for the opportunity. So the Dirty Dozen list is a list that Nicosi issues every year. We publish a list of entities that in some way facilitate, profit from, normalize, fuel sexual abuse and exploitation. These are generally pretty mainstream corporations. Sometimes there will be a government agency on there. We've even listed a state government before. So like right now we have the state of Nevada on the list because they have legalized prostitution in the state of Nevada, and it's just been an unmitigated disaster and resulted in countless trauma to so many women and girls in Nevada.
It's so crazy to me, Lisa, how many people push back against that. I'll read articles and I'll read blogs and all this stuff. In the comment section, the amount of uninformed nonsense that gets put out there by people who don't work with women and men, who do not see the victims. I'm sure it's frustrating to you as well, but yeah. So keep going. Sorry.
Yeah, it's sad to hear that, but there's a lot of victimization and trauma and horrible things that are happening to women in legal brothels and outside of them in Nevada. In Nevada, I think I believe is fully I don't think they're in the dark about what's happening. So anyway, we're suing the state of Nevada too, in partnership with some others. So we're trying to.
So we have I will tell you this, we have one of our purchased offices is now in Las Vegas. So we just launched Purchase Las Vegas. And so we have a huge human trafficking partnered with a church there, a large church there, Hope Church. And so maybe offline I'll send you some emails about it and we can connect. But
stay in touch after this.
Yeah.
We're doing so many great things. So back to the Dirty Dozen list, though. So we published this list of a name. These generally they're very big. I mean, in some instances, we're taking on the biggest corporations that exist in the world, entities like Google, Amazon, Twitter, Reddit. I mean, it's really big companies, well known in the tech sector. You know, companies like Google, you can't get much bigger when you're trying to, tackle a corporation for bad.
Can you give some examples of how these, for the average person to understand, like how Google is tied into that, or I think Netflix is on there?
Well, part of our issue is that a lot of these corporations, especially in the tech sector, are responsible for creating technologies, and then they never take account of risk to children. Mm-hmm. It's not just like a standard practice, like, oh, how are we going to make this safe for kids? It's like, it's not even an afterthought. It's like an afterthought. It's like way down. And even then, it's like you have to completely raise a massive hue and cry for them to pay attention. But the really good news is we've had a major win with Google. Like, our team was just over the moon. We couldn't believe it. So we've been pressuring Google for years over their Google Chromebooks. So these are devices that are being given out to children in schools. Mm-hmm. They're internet connected, and they were not pre-activating the protective features like filters and other mechanisms that could have helped increase child safety. They just, drop these. Here's school administrators. You figure it out. And we're talking like this can be really, really complicated. I know our CEO met with an individual, like somebody, I don't know if it was maybe it was our advocacy director, who met with somebody from their school to try to help their school figure out how to do it. 2 hours later, they were still working at it. Yep. Trying to figure out how to turn in all these protections on these devices. So it's completely overwhelming to schools. And for Google, seriously, how hard is it? These are the tech wizards of the universe, right? They can handle it. So we've been pressuring them to default to safety, to make it that when we don't want them to give a single device to a kid that hasn't had these protections activated before it gets in the child's hands, and not just to wave it off like, oh, well, it's not our Google's saying it's not our responsibility. Baloney. Mm-hmm. So the good news is they have accepted every single one of our recommendations, and they will be implementing them, as I understand it, effective this September. Wow, that's incredible. Congratulations. Yeah, thank you. So I know our advocacy team was just over the moon, our corporate advocacy team. But really, just to back up a minute, like that stuff is not just, it looks like, okay, yeah, Nkosi put them on the list and we're meeting with them. But what really makes a difference is when people engage and when they participate in the Dirty Dozen list, because we create opportunities where the average person can send these corporations emails, or you can post graphics on social media, or there's just different ways that we try to create opportunities for the public to engage so that we can create momentum, create the public pressure necessary to get these corporations to change. So I think this win with Google and Chromebooks is truly epic for us. I mean, we've had other success. We've had many other successes using this strategy, but this is our, one of our the crown for us. No, that's humongous. I mean, that's so good to hear. It's so great from here to hear too, because it just adds to the encouragement. Well, in a couple layers. One, it encourages me because when I go out and speak, it gives me context to give to people, to give them hope. And to say, hey, look, the people are actually fighting this on a major level, and
and from a Christian perspective, like God is for this and for healing and for safety in people's lives. And Google can't win that, and so that's super encouraging. And then the other is just to remind people that we all are a part of this, that people getting online and sharing and us doing this podcast and informing people, people's voices do get heard, and the good guys can win. So I'm so proud of you and you guys for all the awesome work you're doing, because it's easy for everybody to sit around and complain and be frustrated, but somebody's got to do something about it.
Well, and really, I'm so grateful, Clint, for this opportunity, because like what you're doing is so part of the solution. And, we're all coming, we have to come together. There are good people left in this world. There are people who care about children left in this world. And if we unite, if we come together, we can win. Like you were saying, we can win against entities like Google. We can hold porn companies like MindGeek accountable and bring them down. Like they're on the ropes. Like there's talk that they might not, that they're having financial problems now. Pornhub, that was just second biggest pornography company in the world. And they're like tottering, like they're being exposed. So
yep. That's good.
There's some really exciting things happening. I will say it's a bit crazy. The momentum is nuts, like trying to keep up pace. And there's so many different places where harm is entering in or baked in to various platforms. And some actors just do not want to play, they're not interested in reforming. And so I think we do have some really hard work ahead with entities, like Amazon and Reddit.
Can you tell me about Amazon, what they're doing?
Well, for instance, they have this platform called Twitch.
Yeah, Twitch. Okay, I didn't know Amazon on Twitch.
Yeah, so all kinds of stuff exploitation stuff is happening on Twitch.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So what's Amazon doing about it? Why is it even possible? Why wasn't this thought of before they even rolled out Twitch and protective devices, filter, whatever you need to do to protect? Why wasn't that baked in? Why didn't they default to safety for kids?
Yeah, I think the big power switch there is for kids. We could get into a whole bunch of arguments about adults and what they have the right to do and don't have to do. But I think when you're selling something that children are going to have access to and be on in the world that we now know, you've got to be preventative. You can't come out and not even think about it and then have to look back and go, oh yeah, we didn't think about the fact that these children who had these phones, but everybody's done it. That's when I'm teaching parenting conferences. It's like, parents got their first cell phone, and then they upgraded and got their second one, and then they handed their first one to their kid, and now we've been on, off to the races, and it's only been a decade. Like it's only been 10. I got a smartphone 10 years ago, and now I'm like, that's insane. It seems like I've only lived my life with access to all these things. It's crazy town. Well, look, I don't want to take up any more of your time. This has been super encouraging and helpful, and I hope that listeners can check you guys out. InSexualExploitation.org, NACOSE, National Center on Sexual Exploitation. This is Lisa Thompson, one of the VPs and Director of Research. Lisa, I'd love to keep talking to you for hours, but I'm going to email you, and hopefully we can connect.
Yeah, that would be awesome, Clint. I'd really enjoy it. It was really a pleasure speaking with you.
Good. And if there's anything we can do here and help with, I'm in the process of kind of writing some curriculum, and my biggest push, I'm a Christian, and so my biggest push is to educate the church, to help the church change the statistics within the church, and see that Jesus was all about saving children, all about rescuing those that are weak and that are outcast, and that those that are exploited. And so if we don't model that as a church, then, the world's not going to get behind it. And so I'm currently, kind of writing some trainings and stuff like that. So I'd love to pull together resources. Would you guys give you whatever I can give you that I'm coming up with, and then pull from a lot of the stuff that, I'm learning from y'all and keeping up with through Facebook or, social media that I keep up with you guys and your website. So, thank you so much for what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you for what you're doing and the opportunity to collaborate with you here in this space, and just all the best on all your efforts. I'm just, you wear me out just hearing all the stuff that you're doing.
Hey,
a different
you wear
part.
me out. I'm like, oh my gosh, when you went through the list, I'm like trying to write them down real quick. So I feel you. It's a battle though, and I always say I don't know, do you have kiddos?
Do I have what?
Do you have kiddos?
Oh, no.
Okay, yeah. So I have two boys who are 6.5 and 3.5, and they motivate me the most because I always say I don't want to look back in 10 years and have to apologize to them. I don't want to say, hey, Grady, Jude, I knew this stuff was going on. I knew this was the world you were going into, but, I was making decent money and things were good. So I just kind of enjoyed our time and chilled out. I want to be present. I'm a very present dad. As busy as I am, I try to keep it between 8 and 5 and not on the weekends. But I also go, man, there's a world out there that's coming that no one's prepared for. And if we don't keep fighting against it, then we're just going to be apologizing later. And I just don't want to do that, and so we work really diligently with our kids to be safe and to know how to work with their bodies and how to do all those things. And also just have monitoring devices on my devices and our devices at home and try to teach our friends and try to help them. And it's uncomfortable, but we got to keep fighting this fight together as a community because we can't do it by ourselves. So I really appreciate you. Thank you so much. Thank y'all for listening. You can visit their website. I'll list all that stuff, and like and subscribe to our podcast wherever you're listening to. And God bless you guys. Thank you so much.